Okay, I think we will start our session, the second part of our session. We have our third presenter, Professor Yuxinzhong from Nan-kai University, waiting for us. Okay, Professor Yuxinzhong, whenever you are ready, you can start.
Yeah. Many thanks. Dear presenter, dear colleagues, good afternoon. I'm Yuxinzhong. First of all, I'm very grateful to Professor Park and Professor Yu for your invitation. I'm very glad to have the opportunity to report to my research here. Because of my very poor English, I'm not able to speak in English freely. So I would like to ask my colleague, Dr. Chen Siyan, to read my report on my behalf. And please.
Okay, and the Professor Yuxinzhong will give us a presentation named Response to the Epidemic Disease in Ancient China and its Characteristics. The presentation today, he will give us, we'll divide it to 4 parts. The first part is the introduction, and the second part is the measures of response to epidemics. And the third part is the characteristics of response to epidemics. And the final part is a conclusion. Let's begin with the introduction of this presentation. Well, the science and technology are advancing at a very fast pace, and scientific medicine is highly developed. A novel coronavirus pandemic suddenly sweeps across the globe and brings in new chaos. It has not only caused immeasurable loss of life and financial loss, but has also affected almost everyone's life. Such severe outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic and our failure to control it quickly and effectively as expected naturally leads people to turn to the history of epidemic response for inspirations. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, newspapers and journals have published a large number of articles on epidemic and its management in history, and what lessons we can learn from it. Many of these articles focus on the Chinese history, especially the history of traditional China. The main approach of these articles is to summarize the achievements and experience of epidemic governance in the history of traditional China for guidance and direction for current management of COVID-19. Though these articles have their values, most of them have highly praised the epidemic governance in Chinese history from her historical perspective, with an intention to glorify the Chinese culture. Not many people have evaluated the epidemic management in traditional China based on scientific criterion. To remedy this, I would like to review the epidemic governance and its evolution in the history of Imperial China comprehensively and evaluate its efficiency as regionally as possible, trying to draw inspiration from this history. The second part of this speech is measures of response to epidemics. Measures taken against epidemic disease are nothing more than emergency responses and medical treatment. emergency response fall generally into two categories: immediately countermeasures after occurrence of epidemics, and routine preventive measures and healthy practice. Speaking about the response from a national point of view, measures were often taken by both of the imperial court and the local government. Whenever there was an epidemic, all those specified institutional provisions were not in place, which was different from the case in other disasters like floods, droughts, and locust disaster. Let's see the example of the measures of the response to epidemics. This example happens in Han Dynasty. In the second Yuanshi year, under the reign of Emperor Ping of Western Han Dynasty, a grave locust disaster occurred all over the country, especially in Xinzhou area, where the disaster led to a pestilence. The local government made an consecration of halls of dignitaries to store medicine and paid funeral expense for the dead. In the sixth Taihe year, the AD 832, under the reign of Emperor Wen of Tang Dynasty, there were floods and droughts and subsequent pestilence in the south. The emperor issued an edict titled "Save and Help the Sufferers of Pestilence," in which he wrote that ever since floods and droughts occurred and caused pestilence, I have assumed the blame and have not been able to sleep. I have issued multiple edicts to care about sufferers and required that in areas with an unsettled situation, officials should ask about medical treatment and provide medicines and reliefs to the patients. In summary, the measures taken by the imperial court and the local government in ancient China mainly included establishing hospitals for doctors to diagnose and treat the patients, preparing and dispensing ready-made medicine, performing Taoist sacrificial ceremony to pray for the blessings and remove ill fortune, popularized and giving prescriptions, burying the corpse, providing places to accommodate the patients and put them in quarantine, as well as patient isolation in local areas. It is no doubt that the lack of the specific nation's institutional provisions on treatment of epidemics is related to the fact that unlike other disasters, epidemics do not tend to directly lead to mass uprising, but at the same time, it cannot be divorced from complexity of disease treatment. Under the social medical conditions, the government would not actually take full responsibility of epidemic prevention and treatment. On one hand, medical facilities run by government were limited in efficiency and capabilities and could not meet the demand of epidemic treatment in the general public. On the other hand, epidemic treatment was technically more complex than relief for hunger and cold because of complexity, including the ever-changing epidemic situation and inter-patient variability, regional imbalance in ancient medical resources, and difficulty in cross-region deployment for the government then, and more importantly, syndrome differentiation of yin and yang, cold and heat, deficiency and excess, exterior and interior in traditional Chinese medicine. Therefore, the central government allowed the local authority to act as the occasion demanded instead of setting up uniform regulations. In this situation, the nation tended to encourage the folk to take the responsibilities of epidemic prevention and treatment, especially in Ming and Qing dynasties, when the government urged the emerging folk power to play an even more active role and performed diversified treatment activities by making use of local medical resources and the growing charities. The measures taken mainly included supplying medicine, printing and distributing prescriptions, requiring the government to help in treatment, setting up foster homes to accommodate patients, performing institutionalized treatment by using organizations including public halls of the patriarchal clan and public affairs office, and setting up the dedicated charitable organizations like medical bureau. Or let's see another example. In addition to rich experience and diversify measurement in response, in responding to epidemic disease, Chinese medicine has made remarkable achievements in treatment. This is the Shanghan Lun and the Wenyi Lun. Show these two books in figure are most important medical books dealing with the epidemics in ancient China. Most of the treatments in these works are still in use today. A history of this book is a history of 3,000 years, reviews the bravery and ability of China to fight against epidemics, as well as its tradition of defeating various infectious diseases. However, it seems inappropriate to overstate or be complacent over the achievements in fighting against epidemics in Chinese history. First of all, the above measures and experience were not common practice whenever epidemic occurred in ancient China, but are carefully selected from numerous historical materials. Nowadays, in review of epidemic preventive measures in ancient China, the experience in different time and space was actually merged in one dimension, and the consequent understanding is bound to be lopsided. Then, as long as the historical situation is concerned, it can be easily seen that in epidemics, what were laid bare in society were panics and population decrease more than active and effective prevention and control of disease. In this regard, the serious epidemic between Jiaqing and Daoguang years in Qing dynasty might as well be taken as an example. The prevalence of this cholera variant peaked at the first Daoguang year, when the political situation was stable and the new monarch just ascended the throne. But official response to the epidemic in Beijing was only an imperial edict to order officials in the capital to make and distribute pills and buy coffins to bury the dead bodies on the road. At the local level, only a few officials and individuals or organizations set up hospitals and sent for doctors to treat patients or make and give pills. More significantly, there was the lack of institutional provisions on epidemic treatment in Asian China. Famine management was always taken seriously in China, and the specific and systematic regulations were set up for relief from natural disasters, including floods, droughts, and locust disaster, and for preparation against natural disaster. Particularly in Ming and Qing dynasty, when nation famine management was quite perfect. Nevertheless, while our review of this extensive literature about famine management revealed no relief clause for epidemic, it can be seen that there were no institutional provisions on epidemic prevention and treatment in Asian China. But at the same time, folk forces played a relatively positive role, especially in Ming and Qing dynasty. When the government draws support from the emerging folk forces, particularly counting sages, encouraged and guided them to make use of the increasing local medical resources and charitable organizations to perform various temporary rescue activities and set up facilities like medical butcher and promoted this facility to develop into places for routinely diagnosing and treating epidemic disease from pure charitable organizations. Epidemics are to civil society what bacteria are to the human body. They trigger wide-ranging responses of the society, which is self-evident, especially in China that has a long history and magnificent civilization. And it is no wonder that the country has accumulated comprehensive understanding of epidemics and rich experience in fighting against them. Despite the achievements, we have to say that Chinese society failed to summarize and develop a system of measures for epidemic prevention and treatment, and then generate a modern mechanism for health practice and epidemic preventions. Controlling the source of infection, cutting off the route of transmission, and preventing valuable populations are the key to the prevention and treatment of epidemics. And the most important is to control the flow of people as much as possible to prevent the spread of such diseases. In this slide, the measures taken, including sending for doctors, giving medicine for free, and publicizing prescriptions, missed the point actually. Moreover, although people intuitively realized that effectivity of epidemics and took actions for self-protection, including avoidance and some degree of isolation, but this was not supported by the medical series and was even criticized by those holding the mainstream opinion. In summary, the following three characters can be seen for the traditional response to the epidemics. First of all, although the nation always paid attention to the epidemics and their treatment, a complete system of institutional provisions was not in place, which was different from the case in other disasters, and treatment was mainly performed or tolerable by the society. And then Rich and significant experience in responding to epidemics was accumulated through the long history of China, but it was emotional and fragmented without systematic review and summary, and failed to give rise to the holistic knowledge about epidemic treatment. Finally, with regard to the quarantine, the key to the epidemic prevention treatment, although there was avoidance, isolation, and even quarantine out of institution and instinct for the specific purpose, such behavior was not encouraged or supported by the mainstream of the society and ideology, resulting in this failure to develop in theory or practice. This is a final part. In conclusion, rich experience and diversified measures were accumulated both in health practice and in treatment of epidemics in ancient China, which was undoubtedly our precious cultural legacy. However, it has to be admitted that this experience and measures did not develop into systematic understanding. On one hand, in traditional response to epidemics, the society was relatively more proactive. Despite some achievements, the nation did not take the responsibility institutionally. So there was the most much to be proud of from a nation perspective. On the other hand, even though rich experience was accumulated in response to epidemics, there seemed to be a lack of a driving force to promote the society, to summarize and improve the knowledge about and measures for epidemic prevention and treatment. And as far as the key issue of infection was concerned, its prevention and control was hindered by a force that could not be ignored. That is, there was an apparent tension between the society and the nation in response to epidemics. Thanks for your listening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.